As the violent crackdown continues against rebel strongholds in Syria, we speak to Al Jazeera's correspondent who witnessed the beginning of the assault on Idlib. And while the international community remains divided on pressuring Assad, we ask, who can save Syria? More diplomacy, or should there be military intervention? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finnegan. The Syrian government crackdown on the dissenting northern city of Idlib continued for a third day, with casualties from random shelling and sniper fire mounting and growing concerns for many citizens detained by government forces. The Syrian government isn't allowing foreign media into the province, but correspondent Anita McNaught was in and around Idlib with her team and filmed this report as the assault on the city began.
Idlib's residents knew the attack by their government was coming, just not when. The tank shells were so earth-shaking and relentless, locals began fleeing the stricken parts of the city. But shelter is hard to find when mortars take out entire sides of buildings. Syrian army tanks and armoured personnel carriers fire randomly and indiscriminately into the streets, and military helicopters armed with rockets fly overhead, acting as spotters for the tanks surrounding the city, more than 50 of them, backed up by artillery. On the ground, a tiny army of local volunteers, no terrorists here as the government claims, rally to defend their families. Through the walkie-talkie comes an update on the shelling. "Only Allah can help us now," responds the fighter. Another takes to his knees in prayer. "We have no one but you, Allah." They have too few rifles, scant ammunition, almost no powerful weapons. They're still learning how to improvise the rest. By chance, we're on the side of the city where the tanks are making inroads, street by bone-shaking street. Suddenly, it's not a good idea to be right there, but nowhere else feels safe either.
So this is what's raining down on Idlib right now.
This city of 140,000 is under siege. Destruction of property and lives is mounting. Desperate families consign their children to the care of strangers, to take them anywhere, as long as it's away from the shelling. Some children are not so fortunate. These pictures taken by activists are of two who were killed on Saturday by a tank round into their house. Adults too are going down. This man with a bullet in his abdomen does not have long to live. Elsewhere in the city, there's a sense of disproportionate and overwhelming force. A rifle is fired near our location, and we have to run again.
What the leaders of the uprising here have told us is that for every bullet fired by the fighters in the direction of the Syrian army forces, they return with tank fire. That's exactly what happened to us.
As night falls, Idlib's fighting men return to base to share what they have seen.
There was no targeting of the Free Syrian Army. They were shooting on civilians and their homes. They used tens, hundreds of shells. The humanitarian situation is very bad. The Red Crescent cannot cope with the number of casualties, but the main hospital is under the control of the regime. We can't go there.
There's little rest for these men defending their city from a force far greater than them. The next day they will do what they can once more as the net around the city grows ever tighter. Anita McNaught, Al Jazeera, Idlib City, northern Syria.
And Anita joins us now from southern Turkey, near the Syrian border. Anita, you say in your report that the people of Idlib were expecting this assault. What had they done to prepare? What was the mood when you arrived in the city?
The mood was one of sheer terror, Adrian. These people had absolutely no way of avoiding what they knew was coming. For 8 months, the protests in the city had been peaceful. The demands pretty consistent with what they had been countrywide. They wanted more democratic freedoms, they wanted freedom of expression, they wanted an end to life under a security state. Increasingly, their protests were targeted. Increasingly, Assad forces began to creep and act within the city. Most particularly, they've had snipers, random sniping, just taking out citizens without any warning, just dropping them on the streets. They've had arrests, of course. They've had some incidents of killings by security forces, but over the last few weeks, they felt the forces begin to gather around them. It was predicted. In fact, many had said it would come before Homs, but it seemed that Homs was the greater crisis the regime had to deal with. Idlib was put to one side while it dealt with problems in the southern provinces. But inevitably, the eye of the regime turned north, and the military muscle of the regime started to gather around the city, and the citizens could do nothing while the tanks rolled into positions around the city perimeter. It was inexorable, it was terrifying, and they could do nothing about it.
Anita, why Idlib? Is it an opposition stronghold?
It is, but to say stronghold implies that it's strong, and it's not. None of these places are. There is an ethnic character to the northern province, a sectarian character, I suppose you could say, to the northern province of Syria here. The Idlib region is a largely Sunni one. There are some Christians here. In the 140,000 population of Idlib, there's a Christian minority of about 1,000. They're in an interesting situation themselves. We can talk about that if you want to. But they are solidly against the regime, not in a way that means they are running a rebellion from here. This isn't Benghazi. They wish it was, but they don't have the ability to fight to secure territory. The Free Syrian Army here has managed to push Assad's forces out here and there to allow residents free movement around their own local roads. But this area is also dotted with Syrian army, regular Syrian army regime checkpoints. So there is not freedom of movement here, although in some of the towns in Idlib province there is a certain freedom to breathe. Idlib itself, of course, is a sad triumph of defiance over reality. They felt in some ways perhaps they had established an independent footing, but it was illusory the moment the regime decided to tackle it with its vastly superior, and I can't tell you what an unequal contest this is, their vastly superior military forces. It was, I mean, the phrase that we felt yesterday applied to it was shooting fish in a barrel. Okay. These people can't escape, they can't help themselves, they have very little weaponry. What can they do but sit there and take it? And they are.
Anita, the government argues that the assault is targeting terrorists. Who are then, you mentioned the Free Syrian Army, who are those armed men we saw in your report?
They're the Free Syrian Army, but even then I would qualify that by saying if there is any impression out there in the wider world that the Free Syrian Army is an organised fighting force that has at the moment any kind of show of doing anything more than holding Assad's forces sporadically at bay, that again is an illusion. The Free Syrian Army in Idlib are the sons of the city. They are young men who've all of them had a couple of years of military service, but not a particularly professional one. They can't get hold of decent weapons, but all of them, and many of them are frankly and visibly very, very afraid of the situation they're in. They're staring at martyrdom. They know that, but they can't do anything but grab what they can. And in some cases, the weapons are profoundly unimpressive. I mean, we've seen shotguns. I mean, the things you use for shooting birds out there in the hands of people, and they've grabbed what they can to try and defend their families against a force they know will roll over them. They call themselves the Free Syrian Army because that's the morale-boosting label. Are they being given instructions from the headquarters in Turkey? No, they're not. Are they able to liaise with other Free Army divisions in the area? To a very limited degree. There's no cell phone connection. There's no internet. Landlines work but may be under surveillance.
Anita, many thanks indeed. All right, let's bring in our three guests today on Inside Story. From Geneva, we're joined by Radwan Ziadeh, the director of the Damascus Centre of Human Rights. Radwan's also a visiting scholar at Washington University. From London, we're joined by Haitham Alsibahie, member of the Syrian Social Club, a group of British Syrians and Syrians living in the UK who prefer regime reform to regime change. And from Istanbul, Ilter Turan, professor at Bilgi University. Ilter also writes a weekly column for the economic daily called Dunya. Gentlemen, welcome. Haitham Alsibahie in London. What's your response to what you've heard so far?
Well, I heard the report of your reporter from Anita. I mean, Anita, I don't know when Anita now is. She's in Turkey, I think. She crossed to Idlib. As many gunmen and as so-called the Syrian Free Army, they're crossing Idlib, we know very well, is an open area to go to Al-Zawiya Mountain, from Al-Zawiya Mountain to crossing to Turkey. This is all controlled by gunmen. Gunmen has to do a tactical withdrawal if they don't want to face the Syrian army. There is no government in the world will accept gunmen running free and roaming in the city and controlling areas while there is no law and orders.
Do you accept then, and I'm presuming from what you've just said that you don't, but do you accept that the government is plain wrong when it says that it's fighting terrorists in Idlib? We're not talking about the hills around Idlib, but in the city itself, that there must be some other motive for its actions?
They are fighting. There is another elements. We heard about Libyans coming from the Turkish border. We heard other nationalities coming. Al-Qaeda announced, the United States said Al-Qaeda is there. So that was a free area or an open area to get to the Turkish border, to bring arms in, to bring men. There were all reports and all over by all sorts of agency. This is exactly what's happening in Idlib. Idlib is the last area from 6. The 5 of them, they're nearly under control. This is the worst one, I think.
Radwan Ziadeh in Geneva, what do you make of what you've heard on the programme so far?
Of course, all of that actually is repeated false. We have been heard that from the Syria regime, from propaganda of the Assad regime is repeating every time. What's happened in Idlib actually, that it happened before, in just a few weeks ago in Bab Amr and other areas. But it's now it's actually in Karm al-Zaytun and in Idlib and in other areas where actually the regime is entering another phase, where actually for cleansing the whole cities, the whole areas from all the population. When see that the Assad Shabihas or the Assad militias getting into cities, open the doors and shooting the whole people, children, women, and everyone actually inside house, searching from house to house to do the same. This is a crimes against humanity have been actually carried out. Unfortunately, with the lack of the international community to take the necessary actions, we have seen that stories as scenes being repeated every day. And unfortunately, the international community is watching the Syrian who have been dying every day, who have been killed by actually one of the strongest. I'm here in Geneva actually when the fact-finding missions or the Commission Inquirer ended up with what's happened in Syria is a man-made humanitarian crisis.
All right.
And everyone in the world knows who's the man.
Right. We'll come to the international community's response in just a moment, but first I want to get back to Haitham Alsibahie to respond to what you've just said there, that Haitham, you're peddling government propaganda.
No, I am not peddling government propaganda. This is what the truth in the ground. This is exactly what they said in Daraa. This is what they said in Zabadani. This is what they said in Homs. They keep lying and pushing. This is a proper YouTube propaganda. This is we don't accept. This the ground, the actual operations on the ground just to take out a gunman. When Valerie Amos went to Bab Amr, there were no civilians in Bab Amr. Civilians start to come back to Bab Amr. Only the gunmen, who some of them being captured, some being killed, and some run away also.
All right, let's bring in Ilter Turan. Of course, Turkey is where many of the Syrians fleeing the violence end up. There in southern Turkey. What is the view now in Ankara of the Assad regime? Why hasn't Turkey done more to stop the violence?
Well, actually, Turkey has tried to do as much as it can to stop the violence and to persuade Mr. Assad that the way he's proceeding is not the best way to proceed. But there seems to be a singular lack of determination on the part of the international community to act together to do something about Syria. And it does seem that Russia and China, in order to prove that things cannot be done without them, has obstructed the potential of the United Nations to do something about the events in Syria. But let me add one thing to what has been said. I mean, one might easily get the impression that the Turkish border is one where everything is coming into Syria, from the words of the gentleman talking to us from London. It seems that there is very little evidence that the Syrian government has been able to present to the international community in terms of what is coming into Syria, but we do have ample evidence of people being wounded, people being killed, and people taking refuge in Turkey. So it seems that the flow is the other way around, and it is possible because of the humanitarian concerns of the Turkish government.
So what is the impact on life on the Turkish side of the border with all of these people fleeing across into Turkey? How do people there feel about what's going on just a few miles down the road?
Well, actually, people are gravely concerned, and everyone knows that this border is one where there are lots of family on both sides of the border. And actually, in better days, during religious holidays, the Turkish and the Syrian governments had agreed that these people could even meet and celebrate the holiday together. So there is not just a humanitarian interest, but also a very close family ties that reach across the border. Turkey was prepared, in view of how things were developing, to actually prepare places where these refugees could come to. And Turkey has had previous experience with extensive numbers of refugees. But of course, if the refugee community stays on for an indefinite period of time, the international community will have to come to the assistance of Turkey to maintain these people and to prepare some kind of a future for them. For the time being, humanitarian considerations rise above all other considerations. It seems that the Turkish government is determined to extend as much support as possible to the refugees, and the local communities seem also to be interested.
Radwan Ziadeh, what should the international community be doing now? More diplomacy? Do you have any confidence in Kofi Annan's initiative, or do you think now that there should be some form of military intervention?
It's clear right now that the Assad is other Milosevic. We have actually the 2012 copy of Milosevic right now. It's in all the crimes against humanity, all the atrocities we have been seen before in Bosnia and Kosovo before. All the pictures we're getting actually every day, it's remember us of those days of Milosevic. And what the international community did with Milosevic, sending envoys, EU envoys, UN envoys, appealing to him actually to stop the killings, appealing to him actually to allow the medical assistance and the food assistance to the Sarajevo, but it was no response. Exactly Bashar Assad, the new Milosevic, the international community sending envoys. The last one, it's the Kofi Annan, the someone we have a full confidence of about his mission. But the Assad response actually continue the killings and continue the massacres against the civilians. This is why the only thing can stop actually the killings, the international community, they should prove to implement the safe zone and airstrikes against that specific targets in Damascus and other areas. That's the only way actually to stop the killings, to stop the new Milosevic.
Haitham Alsibahie, how do you respond to that accusation that Assad is another Milosevic? I mean, as Kofi Annan arrived in Damascus on Saturday, what was the Syrian government doing? It began its assault on Idlib. That's hardly a confidence-building measure, is it?
Let's talk about reality. We don't want to talk about some people living in the cuckoo land. Syria always said the political process in Syria and the dialogue is the only way forward. They welcome Mr. Annan as they welcomed the Arab observers before, and the opposition outside attacked them. Valerie Amos arrived in Syria and they attacked her before she arrived. Mr. Kofi Annan is coming to Syria to find a political situation, not a military one, and they start attacking him when he was in Cairo already. This is what the Syrian government wants. Syrian government, I believe, they want a dialogue, is what you call it, monitored by international community, and a political process to get to better what you call reforms, maybe a freedom, a democracy, through the ballot box. But these people sitting outside, they are the only one, what I call the opposition outside, they keep talking about NATO aircrafts. They've been told hundreds and hundreds of times there will not be a military interference in Syria. So the political process is the only one. And if they want to come and join and be part of it, okay, they're welcome. Nobody stopped them.
Ilter Turan, we'll get back to you in Turkey in just a moment. But first, I want to ask Radwan Ziadeh. It is clear that there's no appetite among the international community for any kind of military intervention in Syria. How frustrated is the Syrian opposition?
This is why there is no options. All the atrocities and the crimes against humanity to stop in Syria. Look, actually, that now we are at the UN Human Rights Council. We have the 4th session on Syria, and describe actually in its resolution, this is not the opposition resolution. This is actually more than 47 countries agreed about that. This is a man-made humanitarian crisis in Syria. And this is why the international community is doing nothing to stop that. It's political reform. What kind of reform that the Assad is? He's proposed actually it's a referendum to stay in power more than 2 years, then to start 2-term elections. And this is why the Assad is exactly that, the second type of Milosevic. And this is the only way can deal with it as a serious attack from the international community to stop all these killings.
Ilter Turan, give us your assessment of what you've heard these two gentlemen saying within the last few minutes, and also whether there's a role for Turkey in the diplomatic initiatives to bring about some form of peace or regime change within Syria.
Well, let me begin by noting that the Syrian government has been using these fancy words, democracy, human rights, negotiations, but it has used it so far accompanied by actions that do not necessarily inspire confidence that this is what it means. In fact, it does seem as if Mr. Assad and his government is trying to gain time to totally annihilate the opposition so that there is no one to talk to and there is nothing to talk about. But in terms of Turkey's approach, obviously Turkey will not act outside the international community and is not interested in a military solution. But the diplomatic efforts has not proven particularly fruitful so far. We just have to get the United Nations Security Council to have a more firm position in which the Syrian government cannot find any consolation, so that the willingness of the current government to stop its violent actions and to talk will gain some credibility. Okay. At the moment, this is not what is happening.
Radwan Ziadeh, we've got about 30 seconds left on the program. I know that you want to make another comment.
This is actually Turkey itself raised a high expectation for the Syrian people when Erdogan did a comment that we will not allow it for other Hamas. But it's more Hamas happened. Okay. But Erdogan, unfortunately, he did nothing to the Syrian people.
Right. And a final comment from Haitham Alsibahie.
Oh, well, we heard now another word attack on Turkey. I mean, anybody doesn't agree with them is out of the equation. For your guest in Istanbul, we never said negotiation. We say dialogue among the Syrians. Dialogue and a political process and whatever involve political parties, talks between the Syrians, and a peaceful solution to it.
All right, gentlemen, we're out of time. Many thanks indeed for being with us. In Geneva, Radwan Ziadeh; in London, Haitham Alsibahie; and in Istanbul, Ilter Turan. And thank you very much indeed for being with us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to send us your feedback, any comments you want to make, just email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again. Bye for now.